In this session, we'll be creating a new policy set to support our EasyConnect integration. This policy set, of course, will have its own unique authentication and authorization policy separate from the other policy sets already in place. And of course, as part of building policy, we need to build out policy components or policy elements as part of that policy building process. Let's start that by going into our policy elements and policy results area. And first here we see results that can be provided for authentication, which would be allowed protocols. You see already in place the default network access, which has been used for other policy sets. We're going to do similar here, but limit even further access to our EasyConnect policy set. And you can see within allowed protocols that we can check or uncheck the layer 2 authentication methods that are viable for use. This would be true of either a policy set or an authentication rule. For EasyConnect, the only protocol that's needed is MAC authentication bypass or process host lookup, which we'll leave checked, and then uncheck all the other methods. Okay, our new policy set will also need new authorization policy and new authorization rules, and those authorization rules will need an authorization profile, and one of those authorization profiles will need a new DACL. This DACL and the authorization profile that will use this DACL are the base authorization that any Connect endpoints will receive upon initial access. This DACL will provide them the ability to communicate and interact with the domain and the domain controller to be able to authenticate the user, and then ISE will correlate that user logon via WMI lookup and the MAC address of that endpoint, and then we'll provide policy around those two components. And where we could provide a pretty basic IP access list here, let's be a little more precise and provide the entries specific to Active Directory communication. You can see that we've got a pre-built access list on our admin PC for this purpose, and we'll take advantage of that. And we'll leave the IPv4 radio button check, which should then work with our DACL syntax verifier because there's no wildcard mask being issued on this access list. And then authorization profile. Again, we're creating this authorization profile to provide for all EasyConnect endpoints for that initial access to Active Directory. And for this authorization profile, we'll enable passive identity tracking, which will provide that MAC address correlation to the user lookup that's occurring with WMI. And we'll provide that DACL, which allows interaction with the domain controller. Then we'll modify a couple of existing authorization profiles to work with our existing domain accounts. In this case, we'll be providing the standard DACL, but we're also activating passive identity tracking, again for that MAC address correlation. Notice this does not modify the radius authorization attributes that are sent towards the NAT. This is simply for system tracking within ISE itself. Done that for contractors. Let's do it for our employee users as well. Okay, so now we've got a new DACL, new authorization profile created, and a couple of authorization profiles modified, all to support passive identity tracking and to provide the necessary access to interact with Active Directory as part of the EasyConnect solution. Okay, let's create our new policy set now. And we've opened up the policy sets view. We can see our existing wired and wireless along with the default policy set. And we're going to add a new one. And again, as a reminder, all rules and conditions within ISE are evaluated top to bottom. So we've added a new one at the top for our Easy Connect testing. And just as an example where we're trying to be very precise with the entities that are allowed to interact with our Easy Connect policy set, we'll find an example of the kind of precision that can be applied for condition matching within a policy set match or an authentication rule match, either way. In this case, one value that we'll want to match for sure is that it's MAB authentication. Wired MAB, and we can combine that with a radius attribute that will focus on the IP address of the network access device sending the access request. And scroll to the bottom of this list and we can see NAS IP address, which is the radius attribute being sent with that information, and we want to match something specific. In this case, the management IP address of our 3K access switch. We can combine this to make it even more precise and focus on the actual switch port that's used for access. Click on the port and we can see NAS port ID as our option there. And in this case, this attribute being sent by the NAD as part of the access request is quite specific to iOS and formatted just so no abbreviations, and it's case sensitive, and we'll take advantage of our cheat sheet for that aspect as well. And this is the switch port our Court PC is connected to. So there's our new policy set with very precise conditions. The only other remaining item is to define the protocols that we allow for access. And we'll pick our new Easy Connect protocol set, which has only MAB activated. Then we'll save this. Okay, now let's develop our authentication policy. In this case, we can take advantage of the existing default rule and modify it such that we'll authenticate and validate against internal endpoints. And because the Easy Connect solution and relying on MAB such in the way that it is, will anticipate a decent amount of MAB failure to occur. It's a very dynamic process as users log in and log out. And so in all cases we want to continue to authorization processing in the event of authentication failure or MAB user not found. Now for our authorization rules, we'll modify the existing default rule and clear out the deny access authorization profile and replace it with AD access. And again, AD access providing all the necessary communication ports for Active Directory and activating passive identity tracking. And then a rule for our employees. And conditions here work very much like they do with the Active Directory join point, except they're specific to passive ID and the tracking service that relates. And because that ties to our Active Directory join point, we see those Active Directory groups there. And we'll select our modified employee access authorization profile, which has been updated to support passive identity tracking. And take advantage of duplicate and modify this for our contractors. And save our policy set. So in review, we've just created a new policy set with very precise condition matching in order to utilize this policy set, an authentication rule that authenticates against our internal endpoints and anticipates MAB failure in order to process against Easy Connect lookup service, and then authorization rules that turn on passive identity tracking and provide appropriate permissions for the users as they access.